I in collaboration with the African Population and Health Research Center. Well, another thing is that we also have like some fact sheets that you have on your tables, and an examination of the LGBTI people lived experiences, a short findings of the research as well. Yeah. So I am going to welcome Dr. Afrodis Kagavas so that he can welcome us into this important meeting. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Ngaramutse. I think we have a translating team, so I will use English and they will translate because we want to make this this session very interactive. So thank you so much all for making it, and I want to apologize that we have started slightly late. The testing has taken some time, but I quite see well that in the room we have a good representation, so we can start. And again, this is one of the series of our dissemination findings. So we have a number are going on. So for those who are not here yet, they will have a chance to look into the report and see what has come out. So I want to thank so much the team from PHRC that we have worked together to have this report. I guess to the best of my knowledge, this is the first detailed report on LGBT lived experiences in Rwanda. So I'm interesting you. I know they have put a number of documents on your table. There are quite many. But we've tried again to make it to the best summary. So you have a fact sheet, you have the report. If anyone hasn't got a copy of the report, please let our team know and we'll give you a copy of the report. We'll also share the soft copy. Of course, we are asking you to continue the dissemination because we want as many people to have access on this report. As we just had from the representation when we were deciding, this is our second one. Yesterday we had a dissemination in Huye. This study was done. Don't want to delve into the contents of the research because shortly you'll have a more detailed presentation. But this research was done by APHRC and HDI team with support from CEDA. Thank you so much for the support. And it was done in two main provinces, Kigali City and Southern Province. So yesterday we had our first dissemination in Huye to give an opportunity to the communities to see what has come out of the report. And just a month ago, we had also a validation meeting where the main focus was really inviting the researchers. So in the room we had a different group. We had researchers who were looking at telling us about methodology and sample, and it was more really like informative so that it could improve the version that we have today that we are disseminating. So we try to invite people who we think could use the findings in one way or the other. That's why you're here. If you were trying to find out why we invited you, it was because of that. We said, based on your work, this probably could do further the inclusion of what you're doing, to understand that we have a community that has been condemned by different factors, and they're struggling to enjoy their rights differently from other Rwandans. So the report really looked at the lived experiences. And when we look at as you will realize, when we look at the framework, and I've been getting a number of questions from colleagues that we have LGBT people in Rwanda. Yes, we do. And people asking about conventions. Conventions of human rights are there, and they are there to protect all Rwandan citizens. The good thing is that when you look at the policy framework, Rwanda has done a very good job in terms of coming out to say we don't want to leave anyone behind. However, when you read the report, you'll find that discrimination is still happening. LGBT community members are still struggling um, in all spaces from different levels. HDI has been working on this issue since 2009, when there was an attempt to criminalize the same-sex relationship. And we are happy to note that from the conversation that happened at Voca's work, Rwanda decided not to criminalize. And this one I say with a lot of appreciation, because I know in some of the countries, neighboring countries, we couldn't even be able to have this kind of meeting. So the first step is always to recognize that, yes, we have some gaps that can be filled. There are some challenges. So the fact that we have very good policy framework, that's why we want people to get to see what is in the report, so that can inform our programming. If you're working in human rights work, if you're working in development, inclusive development, if you're addressing issues of key populations and LGBT rights, if you're addressing issues of women, you need to see that whoever we're working with, communities are not homogeneous, and we need to open the curtain and see what's happening. And I want to thank everyone who contributed in this research, the LGBT community who are able to share their stories, the community members who agreed to express their feelings and participate in the study, the research team that worked so hard to put up, I remember when we were deciding and looking at who would agree to go to do the research, there were a lot of fears about security. If you ask someone who is in the market to say, can you express yourself, how would they react? But they did a very good job. So we are very happy that today we have a very good product that we are disseminating, and we will continue to disseminate for people to know. But our interest is not only people to know. We want actions to be taken. So from this dissemination, as you will see, we have very good recommendations. We're going to engage different stakeholders. We've started the engagement already with the key government institutions that are in charge of implementing different human rights frameworks. Whether you know, Rwanda was recently reviewed under UPR, and there were some specific recommendations given to Rwanda, specifically on LGBT rights. We are discussing with other ministries on gender inclusion and how it should look like. What I can assure you is that from the initial conversations, we have got a very good response from government, ready to engage, the readiness to know, see what can we do. So the advocates who are in the room, please take the findings and take them to action. Let's engage and ensure that we have a more inclusive, a more enabling environment where no one is left behind. Leaving no one behind is a core principle of our national strategy for transformation, and I think all of you know that. And we cannot go together. Leaving no one behind means addressing stigma and discrimination. Leaving no one behind means addressing inequities, fighting poverty, to ensure that we remove all those inequities that would make some of us feel unwelcome or condemned in our society. So thank you so much for making time. I know everyone who is here again, this was a Friday. It was not a good day probably, but I know the fact that you're here in this room, you've come to listen. Be open, ask anything. There are no questions that are not welcome, because what we want to do is to leave this room when we've got really a more understanding, a better understanding of what the report is talking about. If we do mention any, I know the report tried to capture some key terminologies. If you hear something and you're like, what is it? Please raise it. Let's have an open conversation. I want to declare this room an open space. And we leave this one with more better understanding of the experiences, but also my call with some commitment to do something about it, because it is unacceptable that a people, a community of us, can live a condemned life. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the rest of the day, where we're going to have the research team take us through the findings and the conversations, so that we really carry on with this dissemination of the research findings. Thank you so much for making time to this dissemination meeting.
Thank you so much for that. I would like to request that who are the people who are really open to removing the mask for the sake of just taking the videos and the photos would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Also, on following up, I want to invite Luange Twahirwa from HDI. She's going to start with the introduction of the research findings and the methods that were used for this important research. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really honored to be here today. My name is Twahirwa Luange. I work at HDI as the research director. I'm going to present the first section of this report. So the first section will be the introduction and methodology. My other colleagues will present the main findings and the recommendation for this report. This dissemination is going to be about the lived experiences of LGBT people and the public perceptions of sexual and gender minorities in Rwanda. Okay, sorry. In the sub-Saharan African, there are laws and policies about the human rights. However, sexual and gender minorities across the sub-Saharan Africa are still excluded from full participation in the society. Several sub-Saharan African countries have formulated punitive laws against sexual and gender minorities. By sexual and gender minorities, I mean lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Literature points to the evidence that same-sex sexual relationships were present even in the pre-colonial kingdom in Rwanda, dating from the 15th century through the colonial years to the independence in 1962. Sorry. Next. The Rwandan law does not criminalize same-sex sexual relationships. However, their rights are open to interpretation based on the moral inclinations of members of the public and those in position of power. This compromises their full access to rights, including health and other fundamental needs. Given the prevailing interpretation of the rights of same-sexual relationship in Rwanda, it is really important to understand their daily lives and the realities and experiences in this country. Before conducting this research, there were questions that we were asking ourselves. Those questions were: how and where do LGBT people experience social exclusion? How do institutional and society structures enable the individual and collective protective of social and inclusion? Oh, sorry. How is social exclusion devised and practiced at the structural, social, and individual levels? Our research objectives were to examine LGBT people's experiences with policies and public discourse on sexual and gender minorities issues, explore social educational security and economic experiences of LGBT people, and the implication of these experiences on their mental health, assess LGBT people's access to social welfare and comprehensive health care, including mental health, explore LGBT people's experiences managing their sexual and gender identities with the legal, social, and cultural norms in Rwanda. Next. The other objective was to capture the impact of COVID-19 and related responses measures on the LGBT community and assess the general community's knowledge and perceptions on the rights and acceptability of LGBT people in Rwanda. During this research, we used a mixed method approach. We used two cross-sectional quantitative surveys, one for the lived experiences and the other one for the public perception. We also used qualitative interviews, in-depth interviews, and focus group discussion with the LGBT individuals, key informant interviews with non-LGBT individuals. Next. This study was carried out in 6 districts, as Dr. Kagawa explained: Mohanga, Nyanza, Huye, Gasabo, and Kicukiro in Nyarugenge. Quantitative sampling for the lived experiences survey was we used the respondent-driven sampling approach to reach LGBT people. We initially had 4 seeds who were given 6 coupons to reach other 6 people, which means that each person referred other 6 people of the LGBT community. For the public perception survey, the team reached to the congregation places, for example, markets, construction sites, places of worship, bus stations, and we use a convenient sampling approach. For qualitative sampling, for the in-depth interviews and focus group discussions, participants of the LGBT were sampled using snowballing sampling methodology. For the in-depth interviews, participants in the in-depth interviews were high-level or high economic class LGBT people who were not comfortable to be part of the focus group discussions. Key informant interviews were carried out in non-LGBT people. We used purposive sampling approach to select them from the general population. Saturation determined the number of participants for both in-depth interviews and key informant interviews. For the data collection, we recruited data collectors within the LGBT community and provided them with extensive training. The instruments were piloted before the initiation of the research. We conducted 22 lived experiences during this pilot, 29 general perception survey interviews. For the qualitative interviews, we only carried out 4 interviews during the piloting. All quantitative data were electronically collected using the survey CTO. All the qualitative interviews were audio recorded, transcribed in English, and coded using a codebook prior to the analysis. During the analysis, the quantitative data was descriptively analyzed using summaries and description of respondents' characteristics, example, gender identity, sexual orientation. LGBT people's awareness of their constitutional right, opinions, perceived or actual discrimination due to gender identity or sexual orientation were also analyzed. Qualitatively, we grouped data in themes and analyzed them. Ethical approval we sought ethical approval prior to the initiation of this research from RWANDA National Ethics Committee. I'm going to invite Dr. Amy Igonya to present to us the findings.
Thank you very much. I think I'll take you through the findings. I hope I deliver to my best of knowledge since we've been working together with HDI trying to put the findings together. And these findings may not be very elaborative because there was a lot of data that was gathered from this study. So our findings, to start with our participants, we sampled, we actually had calculated the sample that we wanted, but then that was the basic for us, the minimum sample. but for this research, for the lived experiences. And when we talk about lived experiences, we are talking about the study conducted among the LGBT. And the LGBT it includes lesbian, bisexual, gay, and transgender people. So in this study, for the lived experience, because later on you'll be taken through, or I'll take you through the public perception, we had in total 499 individuals who self-identify as LGBT. And you can see the numbers we got in Kigali was as 55%, and in Huye we got, out of the 499, were 17%, and Muhanga 15%, and Nyanza 12% of the respondents. The average age of our participants was 25 years old. 96% of them had ever attended school, with 55 having vocational training at the highest level of education. We also found that the demographic details reveal diverse sexual and gender minority groups, with 62.5% were gay, 23.8% were bisexual, and 13.4% as heterosexual. This is very important to explain about heterosexual, and this comes from the transgender community, that if you are transgender, you may identify sexually as heterosexual. And then the 39% identified as gender non-conforming, and 32% stated they were cisgender males, and cisgender females were 11%. Proceed. Now, we look at experiences of discrimination. All groups had faced discrimination at some point, but the higher population, they mentioned, because you asked them all the groups, including the intersect, they said the intersect face more discrimination, and then bisexual, and lesbian, and then we have the gay and transgender. This is from quantitative study, but when you go to qualitative study, you find another different story, saying that they believe gay people, transgender, and bisexual men face greater discrimination. But then when you go to also quantitative, you'll find lesbians face more discrimination. And you face more discrimination when you are out, like when people know you are. And we shall go into some of those, of course, that you'll see how discrimination plays about when it comes to, if I didn't know you are lesbian, I wouldn't actually discriminate you. But once I realize that you are lesbian, then I discriminate you. Same to gay. If you are feminine, then you are discriminated. Or if you arrive at a health facility as a couple, then you are discriminated. But before they know it, then you are not discriminated. At some point, it reduces. Thank you. Yeah, so if you read, here is one of the participants who was talking, I think it's too low. One of the participants who was talking about how they think being transgender or gay, they're mistreated. For instance, if you are a bisexual man, and it was his experience that girls like him, but when they discover he's bisexual, then that changes, and it leads to broken relationships, and also being told on in the community, and increases discrimination. let's move on. But before that, if nobody knows, and if you can live as just like any normal person, the discrimination may be low. So as long as there are those marks or those characteristics that show you are LGBTQ, then you receive a discrimination. So these are some of the quotes that we read, and there are very many about how discrimination plays out. Like what I've explained already, they talk about the physical appearance. Yeah. So if it shows like gay, if you are feminine gay, then you are able to be discriminated. And also, so they talk about lesbians being less discriminated because most of them you may not know that there's lesbians, but the lesbians themselves say they are really discriminated when it is known that they are lesbians. So like the other group in the focus group discussion, they said that there's no difference between lesbians and gay when it comes to discrimination. So you'll find always those instances where they say, I think this group is more discriminated, this one is not more discriminated. But the idea is once you are known or people know you are LGBT, no matter where you are, then you are discriminated. Thank you. And then we have sources of discrimination. And you should take note of this because many things happen in this study that you will hear. Maybe the government does not discriminate, but we want you to link between who is the individual. So you see the individuals at 5.6, they are the sources of discrimination. If I am me as Amy, I'm an individual, I'll discriminate you. When I'm working for the government, I'm seen as the government person, not as an individual. So you may think that my discrimination is less, the government discrimination is less, but when I'm an individual, that is a different something. I can discriminate you. So you find individuals in the community are the ones who discriminate more, and the private and non-profit organizations, you can see where they fall, and NGOs, and the public institutions is down to 19.2%. The public institutions are institutions, but individuals are in that public institutions. That is the most important message you should take. So if you are going to create awareness or do anything to change the lives of the LGBTQ, you look at the individual. That is the most important person. It doesn't matter where this individual is, whether it's in an institution, whether it's an NGO, it's an individual. Thank you. Thank you. And then sources of discrimination also. This is from qualitative interviews. They still talk about, that was quantitative. When we have numbers, it's quantitative. When we have, in qualitative, we don't have numbers. We just use cause to qualify what we have. And you can see it speaks to what I was saying in quantitative, that you find that our discrimination comes from individuals, not from government. Government is an institution. It's not an individual, but individuals make government, are in government anyway. And then here they'll talk about their lives in family. I know that my family already counts me as a loss because they know it already. Yeah, most LGBT persons are seen as a loss. That is, can be into society, the social norms, but usually we link this to the culture. Why you are lost? Because you've maybe delinked what should be continuous, like family. So they see themselves as a loss, and mostly it was coming from the family members, how they're treated in the family. But we are not saying not all families are discriminatory. We have a few who are supportive at some point. Keep moving. And then we also investigated areas of discrimination, and you can see here. We have some who had never experienced discrimination, but since this was, I'm a medical anthropologist. If this was I was doing medical anthropologist, I'll find out more about this. So maybe these are the ones who are never known, who are never out. And maybe they are also in some of those families that really support, after some time, support the LGBTQ members of family. Then we had a large number who were also discriminated, and you see the housing. In the housing, they're discriminated. Is looking for a house, residential place, that you are discriminated. When I was here, and I know I was talking to someone who was telling me how he was chased out of the house because the landlord had never seen him bringing a girl in the house. You are landlord, so you are discriminated if you are in a place where they can't see you are bringing another person who is opposite from you. Then they start speculation that you are LGBTQ, and it will be wrong for somebody to just tell you to be out because you didn't bring somebody in the house. So that is what we talk about, housing. And safety and security, you can see the areas of discrimination. In education is about 23%. If you read the percentages here, the numbers are here, of those who we interviewed. And then we have access to healthcare. They're still being discriminated despite using the HIV length to have LGBTQ access HIV. But again, I reinforce individuals are in those institutions. And then we have also in employment, some of them had turned away to being employed. In fact, they would say you'd better look like, I don't like to use the word straight, but you look like you are like heterosexual, so that nobody knows. Then you can be able to be in employment. I remember when I was told of somebody who was, the colleagues were trying to find out, and he would never get a promotion. The colleagues were trying to find out, does he have a wife? Does he have children? So it goes to individuals in the society. And then the social protection also, they mentioned that. And when participating in cultural events, that is, cultural events is 41, link that to the culture. Maybe the culture of Rwanda people, where we are told sexual minority is not their culture. And then when expressing religious beliefs, is 44%, so you find religious beliefs and cultural events are higher. And then the other opportunities that are there where they can be discriminated. We can move on. So from qualitative, you'll get all this because we were using the same qualitative speaks to quantitative. I think you can read for yourself the first one that says if you are gully, the landlords won't rent you their property. Yeah? Some may think twice before they give you that place. And then the majority also reported in public. What did we say about there was low discrimination in public institutions? But you can see now it changes. The majority reported, okay, here they say is fair treatment, but I say we have individuals in those public places and private institutions who are fairly treated. In Rwanda, whether you are trans, gay, and this is what I've been talking about, lesbian, there's no single service you can't get except when you come out as a couple. That is, if I come like I'm a gay and we are a couple, that becomes a problem. So as long as it's identifiable, you are LGBT, then that changes the narrative. But if you are, look like you are not, then you'll get the service. So you wonder why, in fact, this morning I was writing there my gender, and I was wondering, so if I was writing this gender somewhere else and somebody looked at it, would not start identifying me and say, I'm not going to give you service? Because that is something that you identify as either being gay or being transgender or something like that. Thank you. We can continue. And we also investigated about accessing basic services. And we looked at health services, financial services, security services, social protection. I think I've spoken to this. So, you can see the number that says that 47% can access that. Financial services is 42.9%. And then security services, you find is at 54%. And social protection at 64%. So when it comes to access of services, we see is fair here in Rwanda, but still the same. As long as one person is being discriminated, we have to get to the point where everyone is included. Thank you. So here they talk about the experiences, the negative experience from the qualitative work, how they're treated negatively by health providers, even if they receive those services. But as long as we have these kinds of treatment, this has to get out for those who are doing advocacy. You make sure we'll give you the data, and this is the experiences. But then you have to make sure that people understand and treat people fairly. We can move on. So we also looked at mental health among the LGBTQ participants, and we used what we call public health questionnaire, that they self-rate their mental health. And we looked across 9 items with that score of 0 to 4. And we found no depressive symptoms, 5 to 9 mild depressive symptoms, and then 10 to 14 moderate. Those were the scores of 499 respondents. Approximately 24% respondents had moderate to severe depressive symptoms. And when it is severe is when people start thinking about suicide or giving up life or changing towards the other side, is what they call conversional therapy. We know those who told us about trying so much to change to go to the other side from being LGBTQ. And when somebody's at that point, it means they're desperate at that point, and they need actually intervention. We are not talking about the conversion. converting somebody to the other side. No, we are talking about psychological help. I come from Kenya, and this is study that we do here. I come from Kenya, and the first thing, because I've been working with LGBTQ for some time now, over 10 years, the first thing I would go to organizations who have activities on LGBTQ, and I would tell them, we need a psychologist. I'm a medical anthropologist. I cannot respond to all this kind of what they're going through. You need a psychologist to save people's lives, to make sure that they know this is them. They just have to accept this is them and maybe do it in a positive way. Because when it reaches to a point people are suicidal, then you have a problem. Thank you. Go back. I hope you read this. It may lead to self-hatred, even hating people. And one of the things we are told in families is about how they demean them, how they, you are not given that chance to be like a family member. You are mistreated. They bring people to pray for you, and all manner of things. And there was one where we are told that a mother had taken a child to be to the police, and they wanted the child to be in the police custody as long as they have to change. They come back when they have changed on the other side. So there are many things that happens in the families that people, individuals, have to be educated about. So at the end of the day, you hate yourself, you feel you are the other, the outsider. You hate yourself because people look down upon you in the family, and once the family is not there for you, who else? And when you go outside, it's more hostile. So those are some of the experiences they go through. Move on. So that was from the LGBTQ individuals. Now we also had a public perception because we wanted to see all this. We went to the community, and I think Luanje talked about it. We went to the community and interviewed 1,254 respondents. 61% of these were male, 38% were female. And our age range was between 18 and 34. 70% of our respondents were from urban areas. Urban, we had many from urban because we were in Kigali in 4 districts. Then we went to Nyanza, and in Nyanza we would go to an urban place, but also look around peri-urban and see also in marketplaces where we have people coming to the market from the urban places, same as to Huye. And that is why I think 75% makes urban to have more respondents at 70%. Among this, and it's very important to know, the Christians were more. 43% were Catholics. Protestants were 22%. In Rwanda, Adventists are not Protestants. So we argued about this, but we are told it's different. So we had Adventists at 14%. And most of the participants, above 60, had education, secondary education or vocation. And I think you remember how we sampled them. Luanje has talked about that. So we also tried to check on if they are aware about the laws that protect LGBTQ. 85% were not aware. I want you to link 85% to 82% that we talked about individuals that discriminate. I'm not saying it is the same individuals, but just look at the percentages and try to link to that. Maybe it could be telling us something that people are not aware, and maybe they do it ignorantly. Yeah, only 15% said they, yes, we know there are laws for LGBTQ. And you can read that first, what it tells you, the first quote. I don't want to know those laws because of the hate that I have for this community. And yesterday when we were doing a dissemination, I remember somebody said in the meeting that they know this is against Christian values, and so they have to be prepared to face the consequences. I'm a researcher, but I hate to ask what consequences and what is a Christian. I'm a Christian too, Catholic. I research LGBTQ people. I'm a researcher. But I have not, maybe I should look down into the Christian and really understand what Christianity means. And if you are a pastor here or you belong to any religion, you have to understand your religion well. And if your religion says discriminate, then that is a different kind of religion. So the other said there are no laws and regulations about LGBTQ. Yeah. But we have customs. You know, remember when we are talking about sources or places where they're discriminated most, and culture places were one of them. Because the culture here does not tolerate LGBTQ. Now we looked about acceptability in the community. Of course, we have to look at all those because there's always, you have to be balanced. There's negative and maybe there could be positive as well. So we read to them statements actually. There were to read statements and they were to grade those statements whether they agree with them or not. So you find majority of participants disagreed with the statement that LGBTQ people are accepted in either the community or in Rwanda. 48% agreed that people in the community were fearful of LGBTQ people, and that 6% agreed with the statement that it is unsafe to discuss LGBTQ issue in Rwanda. And you can see what supports that they should just stop being homosexual. That will help them. I talked about maybe the gay people are disrupting the continuity of the generations. And then you see a statement here saying that our girls are missing husbands. That if we have gay people, they will not have husbands for the girls. Maybe that's cultural. Maybe this individual does not know about the lesbian on the other side. Maybe it balances. We continue. We also investigated discrimination and violence. This is from the public perception. So 17% they would avoid anyone who is LGBT. And in the 12 months preceding survey, we asked them, they reported they would avoid, initially, all their life, they would avoid someone who is LGBTQ. But in the 12 months preceding survey, we asked them some questions, and whether their interaction with LGBTQ person, whether they have used derogatory names to refer to individuals because of their sexuality. And 21% said yes, they did. And 3% said they had physically harmed the person because of their sexual orientation. And interestingly, yesterday we had a testimony from somebody who had harmed LGBTQ people, but he said it was out of ignorance. He didn't know. So sometimes people do things out of ignorance, and that is where awareness and educating people becomes very important to understand why and who is LGBTQ. And you can see one of them saying that if I met them in public, I'll beat them. In private, sorry, I'll beat them. But we have evidence also on people being beaten in public. And we shall play a clip for you today on that. Move on. And I think that is the end of my presentation. We shall come to recommendation and conclusion. So these are some of the issues I've presented here. The issues I've presented here are some of the issues that are coming up. If you analyze well, we've said that in Rwanda, laws on LGBTQ are grey, but they have assented to many international conventions that are pro-LGBT. But as long as even 3% can beat someone because of their sexual orientation, it shouldn't happen. And as researchers, we still move on. This is not the end, because we still have to follow up and see what is happening. And if we can just change a few people to accept the LGBTQ as their brothers, as their sons, as citizens who have same rights, equal rights like everyone, and nobody is left behind, it will be great African country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And speaking as a queer activist, I'm really happy about this research that has been done. And some of the comments are really heartbreaking, but then at the end of the day, this is why the research was done. Yeah. So we're going to go straight to the recommendations and a conclusion, and then we will do a summarization of the findings, and then we'll go into a short video that was prepared by the research team. Thank you so much.
That thing. Okay, thank you. I come from a remote village in Kenya. We are not used to these things. Good morning, all of you. May I kindly request you to just stand up for 1 minute? You guys have been so quiet and listening to this story. Try to stretch out a little. You can go to the right, to the left, a little up, a little out. Try to smile, dance a bit. Hey, come on, be active a little. One hand up, out, up again. Take your seat. Thank you so much. Yeah, you needed to get some energy because the picture Amy was presenting was making people sad, and they're like, oh Jesus, people are just being killed in this country called Rwanda. And I think that's the situation, and you guys were just following with all your moods, and I was just getting worried that we just going to have everyone sad here today. But I think we are seated here to find the solution. That's why we should be happy, because we are the solution, right? So in this section that you're going to do this presentation, kindly let's have it on the screen. You're just looking at the conclusions, what are the implications of all these findings, and then what are the recommendations, what are we going to do from here. And in terms of those recommendations, as Dr. Kagaba mentioned, there was a validation meeting that was held here with stakeholders in Rwanda, who suggested some of the key actions that need to be undertaken for us to address some of the exclusion, discrimination, and abusive issues against LGBT community. And I think also from the study, study participants recommended most of those items. In terms of structure of how we move forward from here, we've also suggested that we shall have you as key stakeholders just have a little conversation within your groups. I will show you later at the end of this presentation that represented here we have international community, international partners. We also have government representatives, civil society organizations, and of course members of the LGBT community and other community members of Rwanda. So we expect you to sit down later and just have that conversation and tell us what are these practical steps in the short term, mid-term, and the long term that we need to do to address the issues we are raising in this study. Brother, now we can move to which screen? Amy, which one were you using? The other one or this one? I think I'll, no, my eyes cannot get there. Let me try this one. Oh, sure, that helps. It's better. I don't know how you survived there before all that time. Okay, in terms of conclusion, we are saying there is extreme or hostile attitudes towards LGBT persons, communities, and their rights in Rwanda. I think Amy belabored that as much in terms of all the quotes community members were giving, what the statistics are showing. Marginalization of LGBT community in Rwanda negatively influences the ability to access and utilize basic services, including housing, employment, and simply going to a coffee shop. You saw that, and I think one of the major areas in terms of basic social and services included expressing religious views and participating in religious activities. And those are fundamental services that each and everyone needs to be able to access. And in terms of the implication of what is happening, then you realize that these individuals are not able to access such basic services. Moreover, the discrimination may also negatively impact the mental health of LGBT people, with many of them, of those interviewed, describing issues of anxiety, depression, and social isolation, and a need to conceal their identities. again referencing to what Amy was talking about, she said, as long as you keep your identity undercover, you probably will walk in the streets like anyone else. The moment you make it known, then you become a subject of, or a target of discrimination and exclusion, and therefore leading to mental issues. And I think what she did there in the public health questionnaire, it was very clear that really the people with moderate or severe mental issues. Let's look at next slide. Next slide, please. All right. There is also a belief that LGBT persons have access to same rights and protection as non-LGBT. To some extent, I think that is tied to the identity issue. Provided you are not able to identify identity, then it's possible you can access. But overall, then there is a belief of inequality. So, and I think the Constitution of Rwanda makes reference to that statement, that all are supposed to be equal before the law. Next, I mean, working with these allies, I think that is a confusion somewhere. All right. So I think in the finding we said that there are a number of allies that are pro-LGBT that support, and Amy made that reference even at household level. There are households that accept these individuals, and therefore the conclusion there is that when we work with those who support them, it becomes instrumental in the realization of the human rights and dignity of LGBTQ persons. And then despite progressive laws and policies assented to by the state, it is silence could facilitate social exclusion. And later on in the recommendations, we've made a clear recommendation to address that. When the laws are progressive, but then there's inaction in terms of implementing and voicing what that law is, and really raising awareness on what the protection mechanisms are, then you indirectly perpetuate the exclusion of these communities. So the findings provide insights into the important factors contributing to social exclusion of the LGBT people in Rwanda. Next slide. Now, we go to specifically what we need to do in terms of recommendations. One of those that we are raising here, and based on the consultations with study participants and also stakeholders during the validation, that we need to conduct awareness campaigns among LGBT people to ensure that they know their human rights, LGBT relevant policies, and the legal protections available to them. You see, as right holders, if you do not understand your rights yourself, then you become susceptible to abuse because you cannot protect yourself because of that ignorance. So we need to raise that level of awareness among the LGBT people so that they understand, as humans, they are equal to every other citizen of the Great Republic of Rwanda, and indeed in all parts of the world and in Africa as a whole. Implement programs that raise awareness among the LGBT community and which foster acceptance of gender and sexual diversity. And we're saying this can be done through community dialogues which bring LGBT to non-LGBT people for open discussions, as this can be a viable pathway to creating awareness. So in terms of approach to awareness, then we are recommending here open dialogue among LGBT and non-LGBT so that we get to understand each other in terms of acceptance of the LGBT community. And then in terms of approaching that to that awareness, we've also recommended here that we need to have community leaders who are trained, especially religious leaders, to facilitate that dialogue. And then in terms of service providers, we recommend that we train health workers, law enforcement officers. I've seen a good number of them here. Thanks for attending this meeting so that you understand really what these issues are. members of the media, education sector, and judges and lawyers in the justice system. So in that training, we need to include the rights of LGBT and access to services for LGBT people. I think that's very important as we move forward as stakeholders in this discourse. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we've already touched this about involving faith leaders in influencing community perceptions. This may be a tall order, especially because majority of those who hold a very hard stand come from the faith community, and really, if we want to touch them, then we need to involve the leadership of the faith community to be able to run campaigns on LGBT rights. And then finally, in terms of addressing protection issues, there's need to advocate for, and I think we all have responsibility for that as policy actors, then enact and implement a comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation and policies that address all forms of direct and indirect discrimination, including sexual orientation and gender identity. This should be supplemented with strengthening of capacity of law enforcement officials to implement and monitor these laws and policies in an accountable manner. I think this is very important because we have fragmented pieces of laws, and none of them directly actually mentions protection of LGBT as one of the non-discrimination issues, and therefore we recommend that we need a comprehensive legislation that addresses all discrimination issues, including LGBT, and then implement it and have law enforcement agents well trained to understand the importance of implementing that law, monitoring that law, and being accountable to the system and to the citizens for protection of everybody's rights, including LGBT people's rights. I think overall, those were the thoughts that came up, both from the study participants and the consultations we held during the validation workshop. So I know we may not have provided every solution in terms of these recommendations, but we thought these were key. But we have an opportunity to have you today here to be able to practically give us those key actions that we need you to recommend to us, or to commit to do, actually. I think the key word here is to commit to do, to be able to address exclusion, discrimination, and abuse of these individuals. I take a pause there a bit, just to give you a breather to digest what we've discussed so far. I don't know, in terms of agenda. Okay. I think even this task we do after the break. I'm told from here we're going to have some snack. So we have three groupings here. I hope we are adequately represented: government and CSOs and religious organizations and international partners. For group one, we would want you to just sit down together as a group, as government representatives or government actors, to tell us what actions you're going to do as partners, as agencies. This is in terms of short-term, medium-term, and long-term, to address exclusion, discrimination, and abuse of LGBT people. Same applies, it's the same question, but we know we have different roles and different capacities and different responsibilities. So for CSOs and religious organizations, you also come together as a group and practically tell us what are these actions that you need to undertake to address exclusion, discrimination, and abuse of LGBT people. And then lastly, our international partners. I had GIZ represented here, UNFPA, there is CEDA, or the Embassy of Sweden in country. I think a number of international partners that were mentioned here. So practically, what are these things that you need to do this? I give an example for CSOs. It could just be as simple as running a social media campaign. As in the very short term, you want to raise awareness about the findings of this study. So that could be something that you can take forward practically living here today after this meeting you're going to do. For religiously, for government, I give an example. For example, you are going to make an official statement to say that LGBT rights must be respected in Rwanda. It can just be as simple as that, and people understand that government says these are citizens of this country and therefore deserve equal treatment like any other citizen of the Republic of Rwanda. That is an immediate action in the very short term. If you commit to do that, it's going a long way in addressing exclusion, discrimination, and abuse. So I think in your group, you can have that conversation. I'll be moving around, and my colleagues will also be moving around if you need any guidance in understanding this. So, but I think it is pretty clear in terms of those steps that you need to do. I think with that, that is certainly not me. 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 All right, thanks. That was a good way of telling me sit down. Thank you. All right, it was enjoyable presenting to you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for the recommendations. And we are just going straight ahead to show you guys a short video that was compiled, rather created by the team that did the research. And then after that, we're going to get a snack. And after that, we're going to come back. We do a summary of the research and the recommendations and the finding and the conclusion. And then we can go into groups in ensuring that LGBT people's rights is, yeah. Thank you.
Murakoze, nitwa Chris. Mfite imyaka hagati ya 25 na 30. Ndi umunyarwanda. Mu buzima busanzwe nkora akazi kajyanye na music. Ndi umucuranzi. Nkaba ndi member wa LGBT community. Navutse ndi umuhungu mu byo ariko n'ibyo mu imbere numva nta buhungu burimo, numva nk'ururwa ahubwo n'abahungu bagenzi banjye. Nagiye mu bugi byatangiye kuba ikibazo muri famiye.
Due to the technical difficulties, I think we can start with the snacks, and then we can come back and then we continue with the short video. Thank you so much.
Video bari guplayinga kuri Zoom. Zoom turi gukorera. Naye aho birakunda. Iri kuri Zoom. Iri live. Live. None ushaka kuyiplayinga kugira ngo babaye. Niye bayo. Wowe doing. Sibyo? Ngaho. Niba bayikoresha hagaritse. Ngiye kohereza amayinite ntabyibagiwe. ubundi bino babibyo babikunda hari imbere no kuzakora umunsi ubona duhita playing agenda gifata kugenda gahoro kireho ibi yari
mama wanjye ndibuka yakundaga kumbwira cyane nari nzi ko ibi bintu wabigize uri umwana mutoya ariko numara gukura ko bizahinduka ariko ndi kubona uri gukomeza kubimbwa niryo jambo yakundaga gukoresha cyane bigeraho mama wanjye akazajya yumva ko hari ikibazo yavuza akandishakira abaganga ngo bamvure bakanjyana mu masengesho ngo bansengere tukajya ku musozi nkamarayo iminsi 3 nabishaka rimwe na rimwe nanjye nkajyayo mbishaka ariko ntabwo byahindukaga kuko numvaga hari uwo bashaka
How do we feel?
How do we feel? How do we feel? How do
How do you feel right now?
How do you feel right now? How do you feel right now? How do you feel right now? How do you feel?
Then after that, we're going to go through the comments and question section from the research. So I hope you have your questions and comments ready with you. Please be as vocal as possible. We have different representatives from the government, from the COC, from the LGBTI community. So this is a very, very good opportunity for all of us to express how we feel and the recommendations that we want to follow up with. So please do take this chance because it's a very, very important space for all of us to have a conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Murakoze, nitwa Chris. Mfite imyaka hagati ya 25 na 30. Ndi umunyarwanda. Mu buzima busanzwe nkora akazi kajyanye na music, ndi umucuranzi. Nkaba ndi member wa LGBTIQ community. Nkaba ntuye i Nyamirambo. Navutse ndi umuhungu mu by'ukuri mu bigaragara, ariko muri njyewe mu imbere numva nta buhungu burimo, numva nkururwa ahubwo n'abahungu bagenzi banjye. Nagiye mu bugi byatangiye kuba ikibazo muri famiye. Mama wanjye ndibuka yakundaga kumbwira cyane ngo nari nzi ko ibi bintu warigize uri umwana mutoya, ariko numara gukura ko bizahinduka, ariko ndi kubona uri gukomeza kubimbwa. Nibyo jambo yakundaga gukoresha cyane. Bigeraho mama wanjye akazajya yumva ko hari ikibazo yavuza, akanshakira abaganga ngo bamvure, akanjyana mu masengesho ngo bansengere, tukajya ku musozi nkamarayo iminsi 3 ntabishaka, rimwe na rimwe nanjye nkajyayo mbishaka. Ariko ntabwo byahindukaga kuko numvaga hari uwo bashaka kumva we, kandi mbona bitakunda, kereka niremye bundi bushyashya. Nza gushiduka ndirimba mu rusengero, batangiye kubona imico yanjye imwe n'imitangiye kubyuka iri gukura, batangira kumagarika. Mama biramurakaza cyane, ahita mbwira uti ntabwo njyewe nabyaye umwana w'imbwa, ntabwo nabyaye umuhungu w'ikigoryi. Kuva uyu munsi sinishaka kwitwa mama wawe nimba udashaka guhinduka. Ufite kumvira mu rugo ukagenda, uzagaruka warabaye umugabo. Urwa mbere byabayeho, njya mu rundi naho bibaho, urwa gatatu. Muri make nahuye n'ibintu nk'ibyo mu nsengero 3, banya akazi gapfa kubera bamaze kumenya ko ubundi mama ahita ahamagara arambwira uti kuva uyu munsi nagukuye kuri Rama. Kwivuza bitangira kuba ikibazo, ntangira kujya mu biyobyabwenge, ariko najya kwivuza nkahora n'ihohoterwa ku bitaro, nkaganira n'umuganga aho kugira ngo yumve uburwayi n'ububabare mfite bitewe n'uko ndwaye indwara zandurira mu mibonano mpuzabitsina. Namubwira ko indwara yanjye ndwaye wenda inyuma ntabyumve, akavuga ngo ni gute umuntu w'umugabo warwara inyuma, akatangira ahubwo kumbwira ibyanditswe byo muri Bibiliya. Hari n'ihohoterwa nagiye mpura naryo wenda nahuye n'inzego zimwe na zimwe. So kuri njyewe ikintu nasaba sosiyete nyarwanda, icyambere nasaba nuko batwakira uko turi, kuko mbere yuko njyewe niyakira nari mfite agahinda kenshi, numvaga mfite depression atari, numvaga no kwiyahura byaba, ariko nkaguma nkigarura. Turi abantu nk'abandi, ndi umunyarwanda kimwe n'umunyarwanda wese. Nguye mu ikosa nta n'undi munyarwanda, ariko nta niba ko ndi mu community wa LGBT. numvaga ko sosiyete yatwakira nk'abanyarwanda nta kirenze kuba umuntu ari umunyarwanda.
The mics that are on your table. So what maybe I would start by asking is, do you agree with the findings that you heard today? And if you do, you'll tell me what the findings are that you have agreed. If you don't, you'll also mention what findings that you feel like you don't agree with as well. Also, what actually rather surprised you about the findings is, did you hear something that you've never had before, or is it something that you've been hearing all the time? Also, yeah, pretty much that. So I'd ask a team from HDI to help me with formulation. Yeah. As we are figuring that out, you can just start by pressing your mic and asking a question, and then the team that did the research will come and give you the answers to the questions that you have just asked. Thank you. Turi kumwe? Yeah. Yeah, we really need to be as active as possible, Sibjo. So muisanzure, right? Ask questions. All right, so if you have a question, you can just raise your hand. Thank you.
Hello? Yes, I have a question that have been asked outside, and I want to request the translating team. I don't know if they have a copy of the report, and if they can go to page 1 of the report. I mean, the translating team, if they could help us go through those terminologies and translate them to Kinyarwanda, that would be quite helpful. If you hear me, the team that's doing the translation, please go to page 1. There's definition of key definitions, and there are a number of terminologies that are well explained in this report. Just quickly go through them and translate them to Kinyarwanda, and then we'll have the conversation. Okay. Does everyone have the copy of the report? Yeah, so on page 1, we have a number of definitions. Yeah. No, we gave them the big reports. Yeah. I think we gave you the big reports. The big report is this one. You have report summary, but there is the main report. So on page 1, there's a number of definitions. So if the translating team can quickly, and those who wanted to know,
No, but it's very good that you have this.
I didn't know. I thought it was nice. Yes, so the translating team probably can give them a copy and they go through the terminologies. Because we are talking about LGBT, there are some people who have told me they want to know what are those arrows and G, what they mean exactly. So I would request that someone goes through the definitions. I'll follow up on it.
Dr. Kagaba, we shall also be sharing the report in soft copy, because you provided your email addresses. I know we brought few printed copies, but we shall share soft copy version. You'll be able to access it in your emails. Thank you.
Luange and yeah, please take a seat so that you can be able to answer the questions that are coming. Are we ready with the questions? When you're ready, just click your mic so that we can start. Thank you.
nta bibazo dufite ku bushakashatsi bwakozwe cyangwa ibyo dutekereza twakongera muri recommendations.
I have a question. There was a quote in the presentation about somebody beating up a member of the LGBT community and then calling the police to arrest them because they're a thief. And I was wondering if that's something that came up a lot in the research. Like, is this something that happens often when LGBTQ people come into contact with the police or, say, DASO?
Based on that question, people had different views about LGBT in the general community. That was one of the view of the person who participated in qualitative interview. I think we had a similar comment in the interviews, but mostly it wasn't so prominent because most of them were okay with what the government is doing. And like Amy explained, the other comment was the family who took their kid at the police station to be arrested until they come back to their until the kid comes back to his senses. We saw that that is something that is being done, but then some of them are also comfortable with what the government is doing. Did I answer your question?
Hello, can I come in?
Hello.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for a great presentation and very interesting research. I find the findings very interesting, and I'm very interested about the health services and the access to health services for LGBT community. So my question is, when it comes to the challenges in accessing the health services, I'm wondering what kind of challenges they faced. Yes, thank you.
To comment on that, one of the challenges they faced, as one participant explained during the interview, was about sexually transmitted diseases. When they go to the hospital while having such infection, it's not in all health centers, but in some health centers, the healthcare providers had discriminatory services. They would take long to give them services and sometimes parade them to other health providers to see how such infections looks like. Yeah. So by that, I mean like sexually transmitted diseases in the anus. Yeah.
Maybe to add a bit more light, HDI has trained a number of health providers across the city of Kigali, and the problem comes when a member of LGBT person goes to any health center where providers have not been trained. So you find the stigma is high, discrimination is high. But for those that have been trained, at least we have seen a shift and a trend where they can be received in a friendly manner and they are provided with services. Yeah.
And as also we saw in the report, the most discrimination comes from individuals. So some people still have that mindset, even though they have been trained or well explained about the LGBT. It doesn't mean that all healthcare providers are like that, but some of them, based on their beliefs or culture, are still influenced.
Yeah, just to re-emphasize, as I say, if there's nothing that makes you or reveal that you are LGBTQ, you can get the service. But there's something that reveals that you are LGBTQ, then that changes the access to services. Like they mentioned about arriving at hospital as couples, then people start seeing you are LGBTQ. Two, when she talks about the STIs, it is the STIs that are related to the sex acts, especially when it comes to around the anus, the annuas. If you go with annuas, it's quite, they know that this is anal sex. So that actually makes someone to be seen as LGBTQ. But if you go like anyone else, there's nothing that shows that you are LGBTQ. Nobody denies you services. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Thanks HDI for the well communicated findings. I just wanted to ask, we saw the stigma and the highest discrimination is done in homes and the families of these LGBT members. Is there any approach for the awareness or any communication to their families so that they can end that violence and mistreatment? I mean, the families where these LGBT people belong, so that they can be treated as other people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I can also comment with toward what Christophe was responding about the intervention that HDI has done, and also within this study we have got number of people responding that they have faced discrimination in the families and health services, as someone was mentioning. And one of the recommendations is also to increase the public awareness in the community, also to inform the local authorities, because there are also others who have both qualitatively and quantitatively responded that they have faced a discrimination from even the local authorities, from the community, in their families, even including their own parents. So we have come up with recommendations, which last time in also the dissemination, when we presented the study findings, also the participants recommended that they recommended that community intervention awareness in the community is very important. It's also part of the recommendations. I can also comment to the comment that was the question asked on discrimination in the health facility. The health facility, there's I think in last presentation we had so many people asking why discrimination, but the majority of the LGBT members who are facing a lot more discrimination is the transgender. Transgender, they are more discriminated. And also, as our colleague was explaining, when you have some STI-related issues like in anus, it's some healthcare providers, they don't even ask you a consent to bring another colleague. Probably they just come and say, we have seen that in the qualitative interviews that one healthcare provider, instead of telling you A, B, C, D, we go and call another one come, then you become like a learning tool instead of giving you the services that you want. And so those are the kind of discrimination that we have seen in the both qualitative interviews and quantitative, but mainly in qualitative focus group discussion. We have seen those number of people responding that. Thank you.
Just want to
I
add,
also have a question.
I just want to add, when it comes to family and discrimination and stigma, it happens in the family, but it's not just the family. What should be done is to focus on the community itself, because families are in the community. And one of the things, maybe the community, the family may not want to discriminate you, but what the society sees you, then they start discriminating you. Like when I talked about the culture and the norms, I have known in families where, like, if you read that, you watched that clip, if the mother wouldn't have this pressure from the society, maybe would have supported the son, or yeah. But then when it comes to that pressure, the mother starts now to be also negative, because they want the child to be like the society. And in some places where I've been, the mothers, that homophobia translates to the mothers. Actually, I have participants who, when their father sees that the son is not the son they wanted, they chase away the mother as well. So they chase away the mother, plus even some of them chase away the mother plus the other children, because they say that generation is contaminated. So it's the family to be taught, and especially if you get those fathers, and you have to educate the community, the family members. I've had a family where this was a very Christian family. The mother and the father are pastors. When the child turns out to be homophobic, the mother was told she's Satan and she has given birth to Satan, and she was actually chased out of the family. So you are going to find mothers moving with their sons. But these mothers, when they reach to a certain place and they're like, you become a burden, they start treating sons like, I'm tolerating you. After some time, the tolerance becomes so bad that you are told you have to go and change and come back like anyone else. So it is the society that is always having these pressures instead of embracing, and then you are told you gave birth, the child facing different directions. I don't know it was what, so you have to correct that kind of. So the burden is with the family, and the shame the family is going to feel, not because of them, but because there's somebody who is different. So you have to look into creating awareness in the community. Thank you.
Sorry, when you're asking a question, because we can't hear you loudly from the back, can you please increase your volume on the... Yeah, thanks. Yes.
Thank you. I'm called Moses Gahiji from the East African. When I was reading the report brief that I have here, I didn't see much to do with mental health related issues to do, because we understand many members of the LGBT community have been driven to developing mental health issues because of the discrimination and all the problems they face. I want to hear from the researchers. What would you say about mental health? Is it something that stood out for you as you were conducting this research? And how grave is the issue of mental health among the LGBT members? We've had some have been driven to suicide in the recent past. Could you say something about that? Thank you.
Maybe I'll take this one. Thank you for that question. That was a very good question. We try to explore mental health, not in depth. We just try to look at the symptoms of depression and to explore whether the participants are nearing a severe level of depression. Now, we wanted to include more questions on mental health, but we found that we're not qualified as mental health specialists to start including diagnosing questions in the quantitative survey. But that's something we want to explore in future research. And to answer your question directly, mental health is an issue in the LGBT community, and in other, we conducted other studies in Kenya. Well, we found out that the number of LGBT people are really affected by mental health. Now, for this sample size, that's 1/4, that's 25% of them are found to be severely depressed. That is a big number if you look at that size. Now, that doesn't take into account those that are moderately depressed, and depression is, should I say, the gateway into issues in mental health. So mental health is something that we are keenly interested in studying, especially in the sexual gender minorities. Even in the general population, mental health has become a very, very big issue. Talk much less of those that are discriminated against, those that are stigmatized, and suicide ideations as well as harming oneself are things that we wish to further explore. But for this research, the 25% of those that were found to be to display the symptoms of severe depression is quite alarming, and is something that we want to look into in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Ivan Mojisha. I'm a journalist as well. I have one question. I'd like to know to which extent stakeholders, HDI and other stakeholders have engaged government in terms of changing some of the laws to ensure that they are more friendly to the LGBT community. I know most laws are silent. For example, marriage is still between a man and a woman in the constitution. So I'd like to know mostly whether you're engaging government on changing some of these laws and making sure that the LGBT community can get some of the civil laws that they need for them to step forward. Thank you very much. And what government is saying on this? If there is any government official here, can probably answer that question. Thank you.
Well, responding to questions from journalists is not easy. Yeah, there have been attempts to make the neighboring environment more friendly for the LGBT community. As you know, from 2009, when the Penal Code was first reviewed, 2009, 2012, there was an attempt to criminalize same-sex relationship. Some advocacy work was done, and the provisions were dropped. So in Rwanda, being gay is not a crime today. There are other policies like the National HIV Strategic Plan that do not mention explicitly LGBT, but talk about protection of men who have sex with men. Now, the first attempt we made now more broadly, we've been engaging government, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Gender, and other key institutions on how Rwanda can be more LGBT friendly. And we also do monitor some of the government positions in other spaces. For example, I don't know if you're aware that that was, I think, in 2011, Rwanda was one of the few, if not 5 African countries that endorsed the UN Joint Declaration that was calling for protection of LGBT persons. And that shows that as Rwanda, as government is saying, we don't want to leave anyone behind, and specifically calling other governments to ensure protection of LGBT individuals. And this was very clear. And from our conversations with the ministry and other key decision makers, they say Rwanda policies don't discriminate against anyone. And I think some lawyers who are here also know that in our constitution gives ground for discrimination, but also opens up that discrimination is not allowed on any ground. Now, does that mean we have to push for a specific LGBT legislation? I am not sure. But if I look at the legal framework and the conversations we've had with people who are concerned, Last year in January, we did produce a specific UPR report. It was, as you know, countries go under the UPR mechanism, where they are peer-reviewed for human rights. And I think the government of Rwanda was given specific recommendations on LGBT, like asking to include sexual orientation among grounds for discrimination. And what the government said, again, we don't discriminate. We note that recommendation, and we're already working on it. So I think with the current legal framework that we have, I think you've seen from the report that most of the discrimination is coming from individuals. As a doctor, I'm not an authority to say that is enough, but I think it provides very significant grounds not to discriminate against LGBT individuals. Looking at the current legal framework. So the policy framework, the legal framework, and the both formal and informal engagements we've had with the Minister of Justice, they say we shouldn't discriminate. Now, there are other specific considerations, like marriage. We know the family law only allows marriage between a man and a woman, and I believe those will require further conversations, and we've seen the government being responsive on some of these conversations. So we are ready to keep conversations. It's not only HDI alone, but I know there are a number of actors in this room that are doing some work. So it's work in progress. And I would say, as I said in my opening remarks, that some of these conversations cannot happen in most countries in Africa. But Rwanda, sometimes we do share even some of these government of Rwanda positions. We do share with some government people and say, this is what Rwanda said in this space. When we look at all the positions of the Rwandan government, they have been quite very progressive. And I think higher level authorities have made statements on this. Rwanda intends not to discriminate against anyone. And what we have to deal with now is this discrimination that's at community level, that's within us individuals, that is within doctors, that is within local leaders, that is within pastors, and as we said, it's yes in individuals, but also individuals happen to be in institutions. How do you explain someone who is looking for a job? In the past, we used to have meetings like this being denied by hotel. Hotel tells you if you have any LGBT in your meeting, and someone said it, some people tend to think LGBT is transgender. They see anyone who is like transgender, they say, HDI will have your activities, but these meetings take them somewhere else. Now, someone is looking for money, but because you have a meeting that has transgender, they're ready to forgo. When you talk about now people who have lost their jobs, someone is a good chef. Who cares if you're really who you love, or, you know, if someone knows he's a good chef, give them a job. But we've seen these cases, drivers being fired because someone finds that to be a driver. Landlords asking people to leave their houses because they have been observing and seeing only male visitors coming to visit you. Then there's a problem. But you're a landlord who is looking for money from your house. Why do you care who visits me? So we keep seeing these things, and I think that's why I think the recommendation around awareness. There are people we have met, and the only thing we do is to get a government policy and say, this is what the government of Rwanda says. So what you're doing, the discrimination you're turning against these people is not really supported by any policy. We've been training providers with the RBC, Rwanda Biomedical Center. Very clearly, the government is saying, let's train healthcare providers. If someone comes to you, give them quality healthcare. Now, in the training of doctors and other healthcare providers, you are trained to treat everyone with dignity. You're not trained to judge someone. You're not a pastor. You are not, your briefs. That's why we are doing a lot of trainings around value clarification. We are training healthcare providers. We're engaging medical students. I was talking to someone, I think, who is a professor at one of the universities just in our break. We need even to take a step and see how do we institutionalize this in the learning and the training of people who end up coming. If you're a lawyer, if you're a healthcare provider, how do we train you that really what you take as an oath when you're going to practice becomes real? You don't really allow your individual briefs. This church, the religious briefs that you see there, very important. Some doctors are very religious. Local leaders are we end up actually confusing religion and culture. When we say religious briefs, culture briefs, it's so much mixed that sometimes you don't know where it starts from. But we have to keep engaging raising awareness, and I believe we are on the right track. And certainly the Rwandan government is to applaud for making this possible, and we are ready to keep engaging. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the research team for highlighting the importance of additional research into mental health in the LGBTI community as such. I wanted to mention to the journalists and to others who are interested in research on stigma and depression, there is a publication by Aphrodis Kagava and colleagues from 2021, specifically only about MSM and transgender women in Kigali. But just to mention that there is some research in case there is an interest in it. Thank you.
Probably, if there is no question, you can also have recommendations or other future studies that are related, because I think the research was not responding to all the questions. So it was to stimulate other researches that everyone might have and might think. So if you have any recommendation, idea, any input, feel free.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I'm the program manager in charge of harm reduction and NCDs in the IMRO. First, I would like to appreciate the research team for this great insist to bring on the table the data and really an impressive information regarding this community in the community of Rwanda. I would like really to ask one question. I was passing through the report and I find that there is some keynotes that are like a point regarding the knowledge about human rights and laws concerning this community. I would like to ask the researchers what they think about regarding this discrimination we are talking on, which is having a high prevalence. Am I thinking that maybe due to this community lacking knowledge about the human rights and laws, this may triggers them to not to have some cases of discrimination, or they can mistakenly quoting some issues as being discriminated due to lack of knowledge regarding these laws on and policies regarding the human rights. Something I want to mention in health sector as the one in which this discrimination is being like occurring. Maybe someone might not understand well how the service, because I think that most of these people are not usually on their routine accessing these health conditions. I mean, this health support. They may mistaken maybe on my perception regarding the service delivered by the health system, or they can have some health care providers whom can't maybe really understand this community. I don't think this in really a clear manner. And I want to hear from the researching team what can be each and everyone in the room, what can we take from this point. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure if we are going to keep answering one question by one. I think we can take like 3 or 4 interventions, then we respond. I think this one, Christoph, I will ask him to respond, but it will be better if we can have 2 or 3 additional interventions before we respond.
Thank you so much. If I heard your question well, it's as if you were asking whether LGBT community that participated in the research, if they understood their human rights. Is it? Yeah. According to the findings,
you find that some really understood, others didn't. HDI, as HDI, so far it has been 4 years interventions, training LGBTI community on their human rights, and human rights is comprehensive. The entry point might be right to health, but if someone has arbitrarily arrested and she needs access to health care, now they are involved more than one human right. So that's why we had to train them, and we use peer educators through correction and documentation of human rights violations and abuse. It is a violation when a state actor is involved, and it becomes an abuse when no state actor is involved. And we found that mostly they, as you're saying, someone might go to the bar. Some cases we have corrected. The person, because is a transgender, the person is beaten up. That is an abuse, because an individual has voluntarily abused the rights of a transgender. And when they report the cases, we encourage them to take the cases to RWANDA Investigation Bureau, because someone has been harmed, and then the alleged person, of course, has to answer the basis as to why he or she had to attempt to abuse someone's rights. And in most cases, as we're saying, you might find that someone has been abused and the person is fearing to go and report. You know, human rights, you don't sit on your rights. You have to stand up, go report the case, so that investigations can take the process. But as I said, 4 years have gone by, but we are still engaging other members of the community, training them through our interventions to know their rights, claim them in case they have been violated or abused. So now, unless we can do an assessment now to see, after 4 years, do they really understand every aspect of human right? But that training has been done for 4 years back, and that's why we use the peer educators, because if someone's right has been abused, he or she is not understanding the core elements of abuse, then a peer educator will come in to document the case, and then we have to do a follow-up. Yeah.
Thank you.
When it comes to, you talked about the healthcare providers, yeah, we found out that sometimes, as the previous speakers were saying, they might sometimes be taken up by religious or cultural mindset, and they don't know that when they were taking up a job as a healthcare provider, they committed to give health service to everyone without discrimination. Sometimes they don't know that even Rwandan laws, save the constitution, the law on professional liability insurance law, highlights that every Rwandan should never be discriminated based on any kind. Call it access to justice, call it right to access health care. But most of the times we have found that people, when healthcare providers don't have knowledge, they tend now to sit back and don't give the service as appropriate should be done. So that's why we have the intervention, is to train them, at least make sure they understand what human rights means, and they could easily give right-based services. Thank you.
I think Aaron has a comment.
Thank you very much. I think it is not just a comment, it's a question for reflection, because let me first of all thank the research team for great work. I think the research is really informative, and my question for reflection is related to the right to marriage and the right to non-discrimination. We really praise the merits of the non-discriminatory character of the national legislation. Yes, of course, Rwanda does not criminalize same-sex relation. But when it comes to the provisions in the Constitution mentioning that marriage which is allowed in Rwanda is a marriage between one man and one woman, I think that the statement itself leave behind the whole community of LGBTI without having access to marriage. Marriage in this circumstance, I don't see it from the reproductive health perspective only, because being together, the couple may acquire some properties that needs to have a regime under which it should be managed. Because in the past we have had experience of people in the community that decided to live together for a long period of time, and later when they decide to separate, there is no legal framework to guide that. So I think for the reflection, I think having that law that limits the marriage between heterosexual only, I think there is an avenue to think about how this would be harmonized. I don't know to what extent this research has explored that, but still I think we need to think about this as well as an area of the law that needs to be amended. The other question, I think Christopher tried to respond to it briefly. It is in relation to the how LGBTI members who face discrimination, how comfortable are they to report on this? Yes, of course, there is this fear, probably because of the reaction that competent organs would have in relation to their claim. But again, what do you recommend in relation to this? And what should be done to ensure that members of the community are comfortable to report, but also there is available remedies or spaces where they can go and report and get proper responses in relation to these violations. Thank you very much.
I agree with Aaron that if you look at our Article 27 of the Constitution, it provides that marriage is between one man and a woman. I remember when I had such a conversations in the southern province with some community leaders, and they also asked me a same question. How do we know if all of us we are asked to identify who is a man and a woman? How can we define it? From a biological perspective? Oh, it's really, I know it's challenging because we were taking a scenario where a man would go dressed like a woman, then they go to a government official and ask for celebration of their marriage, and to see how they would be challenged, because one of district mayor asked me that how is any law in Rwanda defines a woman? We don't have that. We even don't have a law that defines a man. So I think it is open to interpretation, and sometimes our laws needs also to be interpreted to extend what the meaning of the provisions that are put into the law. But of course agree and looking at all how laws are made, how they are enacted, we shouldn't dispute that laws are made according to the cultural perspective and context of every country. That if you look at our laws, they'd be different from laws in Tanzania, it would be different from laws in US because of their historical perspective, because of their background, because of their culture. I think, and they are always, laws are not static. They are always open to interpretation. They are open to amendments, which I believe that today if you have a provision that is discriminatory, tomorrow if you realize that this is discriminatory, and then propose what should be done so that it can be inclusive. To me, that's the lens I see the laws from, that angle. So if the provision is that, we can as well go to the Supreme Court and ask them what is the meaning of provision of 27. How is a man defined? How is a woman defined? Because in our family laws it is not defined. And then maybe they would extend and say a man is someone who feels or who thinks he's a man, or who is born biological like that. And then we can be able to explore more what it means. Yeah.
I just had the mic so long, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much for, especially to HDR and to the African Population and Health Research Center for conducting this survey. It's one of a few of the research, or if it's not the only one, which has been published or presented to the public, to the such people, to the community, to the LGBT community, to the partners. And therefore, we're not really experts on, as an activist, an LGBT activist, I'm not an expert on interpreting such survey or research. So I want to know, since Ruan said when she was presenting, introducing the to the survey, so she said the survey was conducted in 6 districts. What does that mean? It means like, for example, activists working out of those 6 districts, can they consider this research while working on activities addressing the LGBT issues? So what value should we give to considering the national level? Should we give this research while trying to implement activities addressing to our LGBT community? Another question is that there is we have been like we saw that some people are discriminated. Some like what 41.7% have been discriminated in a way or another during cultural events. Does that, it's one aspect of the culture in general. Does that mean there are other aspects the research worked on or addressed, not the event or not the events? So what does that mean? So because I ask this because Luan said that one of the health services the LGBT people have been discriminated from was access to STI prevention or treatment services. So I was wondering also in the aspect of culture, is the only does this survey work on? Did this survey work on only on cultural events, or did they address other aspects within the culture? Since it's very important, as Dr. Fortes have been saying, the culture is very important because you might even find that some laws are based on the culture, as for example, as Christopher has been saying, some laws are based on the culture or the background of the country. Thank you.
Can we take like one more question and then we'll go on?
Thank you. I have a question and a recommendation as well. I wanted to ask, because there's a part here that you have mentioned that LGBT people in Rwanda negatively influences their abilities to access and utilize basic services, including housing and employment. And I want to dig deep into the employment part. I want to understand if has there ever been a research in regards to economic elevation status of the LGBTI people done by HDI? If not, that should be a recommendation. And if HDI has certain programs or initiatives that are elevating the economic status of the leaders in the community itself, like the LGBTI community as well. Also, in those programs, because we do know that a lot of programs are being done, like you teach someone how to make a soap, but what next? Yeah, are they being given opportunities to actually get those products that they need to actually create a business out of it? And also in the sense of just recommending not to just think of activities like just soap making and anything, but we can go even a little bit higher and think of how can the LGBTI people in Rwanda learn how to invest in shares, right? How can they be taught in investing in different and rather elevated things, you know? Yeah, in that sense. So it's a question and a recommendation as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Arevodeni Vizi from Afri and Rwanda. I just want to thank the research team. My question as well as a recommendation goes to the source of the discrimination. When you look on the identified source of discrimination, highlights the individuals to be at the higher level, which is at 85.2%. And when you go on the private non-profit organization, NGOs, sectors, it's at 23.6, while the public institution is at 19.2%. So when you compare the three, it seems like having a great discrepancy. Basically, the people who occupy the NGOs, private sectors, and the public institutions are from the part of individuals. But again, it's very layered to find someone who is in a discriminative aspect at the individual level, going back maybe to work at the workplace, and then become supportive. So I'd like to get maybe some clarification from the research team about this, if maybe the individuals who participated in the research do not appear in this other part. But again, even if those one who appear in the NGOs or the public institution haven't been interviewed at the individual level, it's something that we need to consider. Because, for example, even if you can ask people from here who are sitting in this place individually, again, on behalf of the organization that they're representing, you might happen to see like different positions. So, and when you practice that, it comes always to the individual perspective. You will always face this when you go to look for services at the different institutions. When you have a one-on-one conversation, so the situation is very different. But the person, when they are speaking on behalf of the institution at the larger group, they appear to show like the good image of the institution. So how do we fight the discrimination which might be hidden in the institution or the NGOs when we see the image, the outer image to be good, yet the inner one is different? So that's a great challenge which might affect and influence what is appearing here at the individual level. Thank you very much.
I wanted to just to summarize the question and ask different research group members to answer. I would ask Emmanuel to support this the last question on the discrimination with individual and the public and the other groups. And I think someone was asking about the economic or innovation work that was done by LGBT. I want to remind the participant that this research was conducted to understand lived experience and public perception for LGBT community. So lived experience, we wanted to see how the LGBT community are living and what they are facing and what are the challenges, then how the perception of the community see, how the community see the LGBT, which means that we were not able to conduct a research on all the contributing factors to their daily life or their lived experience, but we wanted to stimulate all the participants here to conduct further studies. So the questions that might be coming, which are not related to what we have conducted, the study that we conducted, we will just mention that this was not part of our study, but it will be our interest to conduct further studies. And I would ask Dr. Kagawa and Christoph probably to comment on that, and if HDI have conducted some studies on economic and innovation of LGBT community, and if they are really part of what they are planning. Then someone was asking the cultural context, which was also not very much focus of our study, but I will ask Rwanda to comment. And another one was asking about the sample size, and I think it's the same person. We conducted this study in Southern Province and Kigali, and in Southern Province was the 3 districts of Southern Province, Huye, Nyanza, and Muhanga. In Kigali was the 3 districts of Kigali. The main reason of conducting the study in the 2 provinces was they are the main locations where HDA has been conducting its intervention. So we did not use all the statistical sampling procedures to identify those 2 provinces, but we think the study findings attached to reach the number of people who are really representative in the 2 provinces that where we conducted the study. And even if we don't want to generalize the study findings to the national level, but the study can be consulted and can be used to inform the other studies at the national level, but it can even be interpreted in a way that probably someone wants to see at the national level, but we don't want to say you can generalize. But when you read the study and you see number of people we have reached and the study findings, you can easily understand how the national study findings will look like. So the main reason of conducting this study in the 2 provinces was it was the location where HDI is conducting its intervention, because the study would inform the future intervention. And again, we did not have all the financial resources to conduct a study at a national level, or even other factors, which will be up to the participant to continue probably. So I will ask Emmanuel to start, and then Christoph and Kagawa, then Luanj. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that question. As it relates to that particular question, where the individuals, the private and NGOs, as well as public institution, the aim of that question was to explore whether there's anything, what we call it, systemic discrimination, whether it's entrenched into the systems. If it was high, if that number rose higher than that, then we would know that it goes beyond just individual level discrimination. And even that individual level discrimination has risen to the point that even at institutions, whether private or public, this is a big problem. But we see that, okay, the discrimination, they don't see them as high in this institution, which means that because they are working for such an institution, they would not do this, which is good. I mean, once upon a time I was working somewhere and a transgender individual came in and everybody ran away and left me to attend to this person. Now, by law, you cannot reject somebody like that. You should not reject anybody for services. But they did. Everyone else ran away. If that to me is what is an example of an institutional problem. And it's at from an individual level, it has reached to the point of an institutional system. So if you go to any public institution and they don't deny you service and they treat you very well as a member of the LGBT, then that is good in some climes, but they still hold that individual sense of discrimination. Then you will see it back when they go home, when they leave that institution and they are back in their homes or in their communities. It's a problem. So it in many ways is exploring to see whether the system is holding on to the no discrimination law or the part of the constitution that says every Rwandan deserves equal and good treatment. So how do we mitigate that? You cannot, at an individual level, you can advocate for behavior change, for sensitization, to know that there's the diverse sexual, there's a diverse community. But at an institutional level, it's even more important, because at that point you can either deny or allow access to services, to treatment, to even opportunities. And he also links into the question that speaks about employment opportunities. So that question was meant to explore whether there's that discrimination within the system. And we expect, if we conduct this study somewhere else, that the results will be very different, because not too many people hold that institutional barrier to stop individual level discrimination. But it tells us that the individual level discrimination is so high, and then at these institutions they are really holding themselves back, and it doesn't stop it from happening still at the individual level, which is the most important one. Now, we didn't go around asking people, okay, because you work for a hospital, does that mean you treat someone differently than when you're at home? That wasn't the question. The question was to explore whether you, as an individual, experience some sort of systemic discrimination. And if there was that level of systemic discrimination, that would have been a very big red flag. Thank you.
Yeah, on the issue of, just want to make a comment, as asked by Cassie, on the issue of research. Yes, I think the truth is there's a very limited research in this area. I think there's quite some research that has been done on men who have sex with men and HIV/AIDS. But when it comes to the LGBT community, exploring different research questions like socioeconomic status of the community, I think there isn't much that has been done. I would say, to the best, as I said, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first research that I know that is entirely focused. We have another research that we did conduct that was done by the Institute of Development Studies in the UK, and it was also interviewing activists. It looked more, I can share the research as well. But in terms of really asking the LGBT community and also taking a step to find out what do the communities think about, these are perceptions, and it's the first one. And I think one of the recommendations we did discuss is really to do further research, especially when the environment is willing to say, you can do this research. I mean, when people want to know, as I said, even when you're engaging different institutions, they say, we don't have data. You want us to review the gender policy and make it inclusive for the LGBT, but do we have data? Do we have any information on the LGBT? So we are thinking this is the first step. And at HDI level, we are certainly thinking of conducting further research. We just have one which is ongoing on the legal and the policy framework around gender inclusion and the SRHR. We'll be calling in the next probably few weeks just to look at, that one is looking at the legal framework. What do the laws say about inclusion and sexual reproductive health rights in general? What policies do we have? What is missing? What would be the next steps in terms of legislation that are needed? I do know that last year we produced 2 reports. One was on the was under the framework of the UPR, but also we have one which hasn't been published that looked at the International Covenant. We want to report, shadow report, that also try to look at some aspects of the economic status. We'll certainly have time to discuss about it, but there is a lot of research, and we, in our previous validation meeting, we had involved people from the research institutions, the academia, and they picked interest. So we do think we are going to see more research coming out from students who are doing their graduate studies, from other researchers, to try to explore, to understand, and that is very important to inform the advocacy in the future, because you need evidence to know what is happening. It's something that is of interest, and of course, as organizations that are here in this room, it's something we are willing to work on together. We are happy to have partnered with the leading research institution, FHRC. We are happy because this was also beneficial. It was more of transferring skills to HDI as well. We really appreciate, and we look forward from the conversation that we have had to explore further research that can be done. So we need to increase the interest, have more people. We have some professors with you who have been doing some research. So this is something they're interested. At HDI level, we have realized also that it is very, very important to involve the academia. The academia is training. They're training the future healthcare providers, the future gender experts, the future lawyers. If we start from that level, we are likely to produce people who are more inclusive. People who are more inclusive are going to produce. I remember when we started, I said HDI started working on LGBT issues in 2009. But till recently, around 2017, I would see staff out of their windows when we have a meeting of LGBT at HDI, trying to look as if they are in some national park or something, you know. And we had to start investing in HDI to say, what does it mean? Does it mean if you're an HDI? And we went to the level that today when we are recruiting, we ask this question. Because we realized people would leave their work and they come, we have a session, we have a meeting of LGBT at HDI. People are just looking at them as if it's something that is unusual. They stop the work. So we had to sit down and say, how do we start talking about inclusion? And I think the institution, most people will tell you, yes, because I work here, I will, actually one time I had an experience with one of our finance team who had resigned, and she came and told me, you know, now that I've resigned, I can tell you, but we are constantly getting feedback from this accountant, even who is involved, having conflicts with the community. And then she told me, you know what, let me tell you the truth. I hate that HDI is working with LGBT. And now I can tell you because I'm leaving. So which means there are also people who will, because of the jobs they have, who will not express their discrimination for fear that maybe they are working in an institution. Maybe you're in a health facility and you know RBC is saying we need to provide stigma-free services. So when you ask them, they will say, I won't discriminate. When you go outside, we experience this all the time. When you go outside and you have individual conviction, he tells you, actually, let me tell you the truth, I wish. I mean, you're like, so the individual totally disconnects from the institution. Because of the institution, they want to say things they know, because they know professionally they can even lose their job. So we have so many people who are involved in this work, who are doing with the key populations because it is their job. But if you ask them what they think in their own spaces, they are very discriminative. That's why we have realized that most of this is also based on lack of knowledge, poor awareness. You have laws that discriminate, that are against discrimination, but people are doing it. Certain meetings where someone says, "I don't want this group in our sector," or in our, so that's why we have really to discuss. And if you looked at the nature of these disseminations, we have focused more on the local leaders, so that we are able to have this conversation. Because at the policy framework level, policies are very progressive. But how people are expressing this and how they understand it, we need to have these conversations, improve capacity, knowledge, and we believe that from what we have seen, it is very possible. Because lack of information can make people behave in a way that is really unwelcome. And that's why we want to continue doing the research, continue doing the engagement, train the law enforcement and duty bearers. We've been having very good meetings with DASO. You know DASO, I think most of you. We want to engage the training institutions and see the advocacy work. And with this research now, we can even do further engagement, trace more people to the research, and we see how it goes. And I'm certain that looking at the progress for the last 10 years, there is a lot that has been done. We can sit in this room and the hotel gives us space. I mean, I gave some examples. So let's keep engaging. I believe in the power of this collective advocacy, because I think we can keep changing the environment and making it better. At least we are sure that the government is committed to making it more better and better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to just pose some questions that are on our Zoom, and then you can finish with answering the rest of the questions we had earlier. Hello, I am Chubahiro Karangwa, medical student at the University of Rwanda. I would like to ask if there is any advocacy made towards adding healthcare approach towards LGBTQ+ society into the medical curriculum, because up to one there are on trainings for doctors. Well, it's better if we raise a generation of healthcare providers with these skills, and it should be added to the curriculum. And his recommendation is supporting medical students associations such as MSFC and MEDSA, since up to now they are the ones introducing these topics to medical students in an extracurriculum way. And then there is another one from Innocent Habumujisha, a health journalist, especially reproductive health. I work with Radio Salas in the city of Kigali. My question goes to the terminology used in Kinyarwanda. Abaryamana bahuje igitsina. This name is confusing because by saying so, it is like you're saying that the relationship between gays and lesbians is only based on making sex. Is there a way that people can sit and come up with a good terminology for the community? Can we also have a name in Kinyarwanda that can include all categories of the LGBTIQ+? Thank you.
I think I have to answer the person who asked about cultural effect on the LGBT community. When we were asking people questions, we're not specifically asking them about the culture, but then you will see that someone who is non-LGBT will say that this is not acceptable because our culture doesn't accept it. And we met a lot of people who said that, and it wasn't part of the question. The question will be like, do you know any laws that protect or that are for LGBT community in Rwanda? And they will say no, because we have our culture, and our culture governs our laws. So that was what we met, and we explored many things, and that is what came up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all the two questions that were asked online, I would repeat and then ask Dr. Kagawa to answer, because they are not really related to the research, they are related to the future advocacy for HDI. So in the first one was asking if the HDI will be conducting some advocacy to change the curriculum for medical students, and so that they can learn more about the LGBT. And another one, a following question was to support the Medical Student Association to keep informing the medical student in the university to know about the LGBT. The third one was the terminology that are in Kinyarwanda, and to see if there is any advocacy to change or to advocate for a friendly terminology.
I would like to comment on the terminology. We don't usually, as HDI, use that. We say abakunda n'abahuje ibitsina. It doesn't mean that it is always sexual relationships. Thank you.
Just also another comment on the terminologies. As a research team, we went through cycles of translations, and we went through cycles, very tedious cycles of trying to get the best terms to put in the study. And we found out that for most African languages, these terms just don't exist unless we want to create them. But we noticed that in as much as, well, it's not always about sex, also, you know, the companionship, the friendship. I mean, even for basic words like family members, for most African languages, you call your brother the son of your mom or the son of your dad. And for LGBT terminologies, we found out that, yeah, there aren't really terminologies that speak to these things in African languages, not just in Kinyarwanda. So it's something that is up for advocacy and more research, that we can come up with terminologies in our various local languages. After all, languages evolve. But we didn't, like, just to support what Luange just said, we didn't intentionally make it just about sex. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the debate on terminologies has been there. People are not happy. They have talked about baryamana bahuje ibitsina. There's even abatinganyi. All those names, at least I've had some feedback that the community is not happy. And I think experts in the language can look at more inclusive and acceptable language. I think it comes from trying to combine all these definitions into one name. So I think I agree with you, Emmanuel, that sometimes it's very hard. And that's why I will interest people who have the report, and we'll share the soft copy to understand these terminologies, to read them and internalize them to what it means. And that's, for me, the most important. Whereas for the right word to use in Kinyarwanda, we can keep conversation going. I wanted to make a comment on culture. I mean, what we have seen, I mean, from the previous interactions, when it comes to culture and LGBT rights, because we've been involved in the discussion at the ESC. ESC is about 6 countries. We've now got DRC, which is joining. We have a bill which is coming up. It's called the East Africa Sexual Reproductive Health Bill. I think Nicholas knows about it. And yes, when it comes to LGBT, we all have one culture. African culture does not accommodate. But if you go and dissect, we have different cultures. In South Sudan, they will tell you in their culture they will marry a young girl who is 12 can get married. That's South Sudan culture. The same thing in Tanzania, they will tell you that. In some Kenya, maybe, I don't know if there are some specific communities, but you can marry, one man can marry many wives, because maybe there's some Islam and, you know. So, but when it comes to LGBT, and I've heard all this in most places, when it comes to this in Africa, we say this is not African culture. When it comes to Rwanda, we'll say it's not Rwandan culture. Maybe when it goes to Burundi, we'll say it's not Burundian culture. So, what is culture in the end? And it is so much linked to region and how region came. So, it's a conversation again that we use sometimes to try to avoid the true conversation on what we need to change in our mindset, because we say we push it because of culture. But our culture is very diverse and very different. There are some things which are done in Rwanda which are not done in some other places, but we keep using it. On curriculum, it's something, and I want to thank someone from the online comments. Curriculum, I was going to use curriculum influencing, but let me say curriculum, ensuring that we have the right curriculum. To be honest, I graduated as a medical doctor in 2006. As a doctor, I was expected to have, at least this should have come to my attention, but I didn't know anything about LGBT as a doctor. And that's quite unacceptable. So I first heard about it in 2009 when Parliament was discussing about it. And then you go to Parliament and they say, but as a doctor, explain to us. And you're like, okay, I don't know. Actually, I never learned anything about this. So we want to engage training institutions. And I think we've tried to see, we have been inviting some people from academia. Sandra is here and others who are coming from institutions to see how do we ensure that our students, the future healthcare providers, the future lawyers. There was a time we were having a meeting in the Capri, the hotel in Nyamirambo, and it happened at the same time. This was in 13, if not 12. It happened at the same time to be having a meeting for lawyers. I don't know if you remember Kassier. So we're having a meeting with the LGBT community in one of the rooms, and lawyers stopped their meeting, and they came to say, what are you doing? And then we engaged them. A group of lawyers, over 50, they were like, why are you talking to these people? And I asked them, can you? Because as lawyers, these people are experiencing discrimination. They need you as lawyers. Lawyers said, there is no way we can support the LGBT community. I'm like, but you are supporting genociders. You are, you know, you can imagine, you are ready to represent a genocider, but when it comes to an LGBT member who has paid rent and has been chased from his house, you can't help him. And I was like, this is something that needs to change. We need to start training lawyers. That's how we started doing programs for people who are already practicing. But then we realized that maybe we need to start these conversations in the training schools. Teachers who are teaching CSE, who are teaching, what are they teaching? People who are teaching masters of gender to future professionals who are going to become experts. Are they talking about gender inclusion? Are they talking about this? Now, if you come out and you're the expert, and we used to face a lot of resistance from doctors, because every time media would ask, okay, people are talking about this, they give a mic to a doctor says this is not possible. We can't have someone becoming LGBT naturally. And because you're a doctor, people trust you. But you are giving you are an ignorant doctor, because you've not taken time really to find out what is. So we really need to change, to invest in this, and I'm calling upon all the actors who are here to invest in that, and investing in raising awareness, ensuring that we are training we have the right curriculum. As you know, we have now CSE, which is being taught in schools to see, is it included? Can we have some advocacy to include it? Because discrimination will start from schools. If you're a teacher and you tell a child who is LGBT that you hate them, or you say it without knowing, because we've seen there's a number of LGBT who have not come out. If this person hears you, I have seen very smart, very bright, who had a very good future, get lost to addiction. We're talking about issues of depression. Someone graduates, but because of the hatred that is around you from family, from friends, you end up running to drugs. And this person becomes an addict, and a future is lost. So we really need to change this, and I think I'm happy that we're having these conversations, and I look forward to creating more enabling environment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have exhausted, we have the room, and we answered some questions online. So now I would, if there is like two only burning questions, then we close. Then, because we who have seen the research team, we will continue the discussion during a lunchtime, and then we will also finalize the report and we'll share with you. And I think you are still free to send even one or two questions within the next 2 days. If you send any comment within this weekend, we'll be able to incorporate that and respond to that and make sure that it's incorporated in the report. Only two burning questions can be asked.
Thank you very much. It's not a burning question, it's a kind of recommendation. I'm called Sandra Musabgasoni, I'm from University of Rwanda, and I'm on behalf of the Dean of School of Nursing and Midwifery, Professor Madeleine Mukeshimana. So I was not around when the research team presenting the study, but I think that this is a very good study, and my recommendation will come after asking some questions. Because the title is Examination of LGBT People's Lived Experience, and there is also a public perception of sexual and gender minority in Rwanda. So maybe I want to be more clarified about this public perception. Who can encompass this public? Do we also talk about policymakers? Even though you said it's starting a point to inform the future researchers, but this can be also served to be followed and writing some recommendations for future researchers. So I want to focus on policymakers. Of course, we need to address this issue up to the raw levels. If we say that we need something to be changed, some people asked, how can we change the law? You know, those policymakers Rwandan people like us, they have their own beliefs, their culture is the same. So I think we need also to consider a study about the perception of this issue among policymakers. And then we'll hear what they think about how we can engage the LGBT peoples in our community. For example, you know, we have like support from the community. If those people are not working properly, because they are humiliated, they are stigmatized, they need to be supported. But who will support? So we need to understand the perception of policymakers about this and try to continue to inform the problem regarding these LGBT people. So coming back to what Dr. Kagawa said about incorporating in the curriculum LGBT component, I think it's a good point to think about it, but you know, changing curriculum is not saying and putting. I suggest that we can even start talking about this in the public talks, because we have this day at the University of Rwanda, every Wednesday we have public talks. Why not HDI can't come to the University of Rwanda and have a public talk among faculty and students, start to talk about it. It's also a good start to start informing this problem. I thank you very much.
I think we said the 2 questions, then we close. I think now we can answer the questions, then we close. I will ask Emmanuel if you can have a comment on the public perception study, because I think we asked the number of people, but not really targeting policymakers. We asked from the community, from the local authorities, from law enforcement officers, and the other people working in the different sector, but not really, the study was not focusing only for public policymakers. And for HDI to do some public talk, I'm sure they will be happy to do that. And I think Dr. Kagaba has already started doing that in the University of Rwanda in Butare, and I think they will start engaging with university to see if they can always, I think they are always ready to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. It's a very good observation. A policymaker perception of the LGBT community. We did think about that. Well, you know how policymakers can be very evasive. Let me put it that way. And we thought it's better to explore the public perception, because even if you enact a law, before people have to accept that law before it can be fully implemented. So we thought, okay, there is no law discriminating the LGBT people. Let's see what the public thinks about them. The man walking on the street, the bus driver, the pastor, the police officer, everybody that interacts with, that would interact with them on a daily basis. So that was why we wanted to do a public perception. We wanted to get as many people as possible, as many people as we could afford, but you know, money is always a constraint eventually. We hope to really get the perception of those that make public policy on these things, so that we can see what they really perceive. And the Rwandan context is always different from the Kenyan context, is different from the Nigerian context. It differs all across INC. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate and we are happy to answer the following question online when you send them the email. But to finish what Emmanuel said, yeah, I would also encourage your student and in the university to work on some of the questions, depending research that can be done, and HDR will be happy to support and to contribute to the study, research questions, and all the documentation. Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone.
Thank you. Sorry guys, there is Dr. Seko Connie online, but we can answer him where we are seated. It's totally fine. Juliette? For the questions and the comments. So what we're going to do, we're going to watch the last video that was compiled by the research team, and then after that we'll do the closing remarks and for the day. Thank you.
Imagine a society where you always feel rejected for simply being you, where your identity is challenged and your honesty about who you are is looked down as behaviors of a rebel. The representation and contribution of the LGBT community in decision-making platforms is hindered. Despite the numerous challenges, Rwanda is one of the few sub-Saharan African countries that has assented into international conventions and continental frameworks that protect the human rights of LGBT people. Its constitution and other laws guarantee and protect the freedoms and privacy of all its citizens, including LGBT individuals. Many people in the LGBT community have been living in silence and complete isolation for fear of being stigmatized, losing their jobs, livelihoods, places in society, fear of discrimination, fear of domestic and psychological and physical abuse leading to different stages of mental health, drug abuse, and even committing suicide. About 2/3 of the LGBT community in Rwanda have experienced at least one form of discrimination, with the highest being when expressing religious beliefs, participating in social and cultural events. This, coupled with a lack of access to basic services such as food services, for example, simply going to a coffee shop, social services, health services, safe places to live, and financial services. While there is hostility towards the LGBT community, a minority of the population believes that LGBT persons have the same rights and protection as non-LGBT persons. These allies can be instrumental in safeguarding the human rights and dignity of the LGBT community. This could be the starting point that will realize their awareness of human rights protections, freedoms, and the key values for dignity and respect. Imagine a society where you always feel rejected.
Remarks.
Thank you, everyone. I think I'm honored to do the closing remarks. But before that, we have to continue the conversation. And one of the things that has come out of this discussion, the last one, is about terminologies. And the terminologies we actually depend on are from the West mostly. And the terminologies travel, and they also carry on things as they travel. And that's why sometimes we had a webinar with LGBTQ community and researchers, and they were like, these are not our identities, or these are not our terminologies. But we expect and appreciate what some of the terminologies have done. Like when you look at the men having sex with men, which is now being contested, it was actually for mobilization, for people to receive HIV, and it came from an epidemiologist, so it was never an African one. But it brought together a way to start offering services. And terminologies, we've been dealing with them, and they're very contested, as I've said. We started with the SADC parliamentary group, and we look at different terminologies. And the one thing we know we wanted to start is to have a dictionary of an African terminologies when it comes to sexual reproductive health and LGBTQ as well, so that we can be on the same page. Like every country can bring out all communities differently, look at it, and come up with terminologies. And the other thing I can speak to is that as we look into research in LGBTQ, you find we had quite a boom of research when it came to HIV, looking at men who have sex with men. Perhaps I could link that to the funding that was available at that time. But then if we did some scoping review about LGBTQ studies that has been done in the whole of Africa, you find the HIV was very high. And other studies, after that, people dropped off. So we are no longer having a boom at all. And if you look at who is actually in that field doing research, you find it's mostly foreigners, the West doing the research. But HIV, we had a boom. Africans were there. But when the HIV is gone, so you keep on asking, were this really interested on LGBTQ? So we have that issue that we have to build capacity of researchers. And with the way we look at things when it comes to being homophobic, we are having very few people who are interested in coming up and doing research on LGBTQ. So one of the things we do at FHRC is capacity building, and we work with different organizations. Like when we come to Rwanda and we work with HDI, then we are able to actually build their capacity. In Kenya, we are working with communities, LGBTQ-led communities as well, to teach them how to conduct basic research as we look for other researchers. If you go to universities setting up a unit just to teach on LGBTQ, you can never find them, but I'm very happy we have someone from the University of Rwanda, and that could be a very good entry. The other thing I wanted to speak to is which we talked about policymakers. Policymakers, we included a few of them in our qualitative work. But when it comes to looking at an individual and looking at the institutional, the radical way you can do it is have investigators in these institutions and see if that translates at all. Because I believe, like in FHRC, where I sit, we have laws about diversity and inclusivity. That is what the organization speaks to. but that is not an individual. Because as an organization, you'll come in, I'll give you the services. But outside, I may deny us, as he has said, that I'm not, I start becoming myself. So those are some of the things I wanted to speak to. And so we have those challenges we are looking into as researchers. We are trying to bring together different researchers from different countries to see who is really researching on LGBTQ. And what people forgot was that LGBTQ is not HIV. These are human beings. So we are moving slowly to other areas to be inclusive, to make sure that research is going on with this community. We do some histories as people are talking about the history, whether it was there or not, colonialism, whether how it affected or not. So we are moving, and once we've done something to do with the lived experiences like here, it gives us a starting point to see what else, and we really appreciate your comments for today. I'm honored to actually close this, apart from just giving those comments. And coming here to Rwanda as African Population Health Center, we actually a research institution, but our vision is to conduct research to change lives. So most of our research, actually, we use it to change policies or to actually advocate for other things to improve people's lives in Africa. We have we focus on 3 issues, actually: research and research capacity building, as I said, and then policy engagement and communication. So that, and then within this, we have different other units that expand a lot. Being here, as I said, with Rwanda, with HDI, is one of our mandate that we have to build capacity of organizations. We hope that we've been learning from them as well, and as they learn from us. So we've been working together in this research from the beginning, not just coming in and whatever. And we come in, we do the training, we work together, we go to the field. And I was very happy with the HDI because they also brought in their civil society organizations that worked with us, and we trained them on conducting research. And we are hoping that we shall continue such collaborations, especially for us who are working on very challenging and sensitive issues that people don't want to hear about in Africa, in African context. And I'm very happy that today we had quite a good and nice attendance, representative from our section. Yesterday we did the same in Huye. We heard also the community and other organizations. And the response was also good. And we have been, actually we are happy being here. We haven't had anything negative. We've enjoyed our stay here. But thank you very much for everyone who has attended this meeting. It has made our day to hear what you think about our study, to give us comments, and to listen and to sit, actually. Throughout the session, it's been long, but we really appreciate. Next time you come to Nairobi, we will welcome you and work with you in Nairobi, so you are open. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for CEDA supporting this work. We are very grateful. We wouldn't have done without you. And thank you also for your commitment of the CEDA team from from Harare. They're always with us. We sit every other minute just to give feedback for them to see how we are moving, and we've liked that collaboration. And that collaboration, I think we've trickled it down to working with HDI. And with me today, I have my colleagues from FHRC who've been working with me tirelessly. And also now the HDI team, you'll think we are the same team. Maybe I could just ask them to say hi, starting with Emmanuel. And then we have Nicholas. We have Isabella. And then we have Kassiani leading from here. And then we have Luanje And then we have Christopher. And then we have many from HDI actually who have been very supportive. The advocacy team, the communication team, I can't name them all. They have been with us throughout this time. And thank you very much, Dr. Kagawa. Thank you. And I wish you well. Let's have the conversation moving. And let's make sure that there's a change for LGBTQ people to be included just like you and me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone has their lunch coupons with them. As I close as well, thank you so much for letting me moderate this meeting for you guys today, and have a great afternoon.